The telegram trembled in Grace Catherine's gloved hands as the train hissed to a stop at Vulture City, Arizona. And she realized the secret she had kept for 3 years was about to destroy everything before her new life could even begin. The year was 1882, and the late August heat bore down on the small mining town like a furnace. Grace stepped off the train onto the wooden platform, her dark traveling dress already damp with perspiration despite the early hour. She clutched a small carpetbag in one hand and that cursed telegram in the other. The words burned into her memory, though she could barely stand to look at them again. John alive, stop spotted in Denver, stop letter following stop, 3 simple sentences that shattered the careful facade she had built. John Kensington, the husband she had thought dead these past 3 years, the man whose supposed demise had freed her to start anew, was alive. And here she stood, about to meet Caleb Youngblood, the rancher who had answered her advertisement for a mail-order bride, the man who believed her to be a respectable widow seeking a fresh start in the Arizona territory. The platform was crowded with miners, merchants, and families, all going about their business in the harsh morning light. Grace's heart hammered against her ribs as she scanned the faces, looking for the man who had sent her a tintype photograph and enough money for train fare from St. Louis. In his letters, Caleb had seemed kind, honest, and hardworking. He had lost his wife to fever 2 years prior and was raising his young daughter alone while trying to manage a cattle ranch outside of town. He needed a wife, a mother for his child, a partner in the difficult life the territory demanded. And Grace had needed an escape. She had not exactly lied in her letters. She truly believed herself a widow when she first wrote to Caleb 6 months ago. John had disappeared during a riverboat accident on the Mississippi in 1879, and after months of searching, Grace had accepted what everyone told her was the truth. He was gone. The river had claimed him like it claimed so many others. She had mourned him properly, wore black for a full year, and then gradually tried to rebuild a life that had crumbled around her. But St. Louis held nothing but memories and debt. John had been a gambler, a charmer with quick hands at cards and quicker promises that never materialized. He had left her with nothing but his name and a boarding house room she could no longer afford. When a friend suggested she might find a better life out west as a mail-order bride, Grace had seized the opportunity like a drowning woman grasping for driftwood. Now, standing in the baking heat of an Arizona August, that lifeline felt like it was slipping through her fingers. "Mrs. Kensington." The voice was deep, hesitant, and when Grace turned, she found herself looking into the warmest brown eyes she had ever seen. The man standing before her was tall, lean, and weathered by sun and work. He wore a simple shirt, vest, and worn trousers tucked into scuffed boots. A hat shaded his face, but she could see the strong line of his jaw, the slight crook in his nose that suggested it had been broken once, and the genuine nervousness in his expression that somehow eased a fraction of her own anxiety. "Mr. Youngblood." She managed, tucking the telegram quickly into her bag. "Caleb, please." He removed his hat, revealing sandy brown hair that needed a trim. "I hope the journey was not too difficult. August is a rough time to travel through the desert." "It was long, but I managed." Grace tried to smile, to appear as the hopeful bride he expected rather than the fraud she felt like. "Thank you for meeting me." "Of course." He gestured toward a wagon hitched to 2 sturdy horses near the edge of the platform. "I have the wagon ready. The ranch is about an hour outside of town. My daughter Sarah is there with Mrs. Chen, our neighbor who has been helping with her. She is very excited to meet you." Guilt twisted in Grace's stomach like a knife. A daughter, a child who needed a mother. And Grace was about to bring scandal and chaos into their lives because she had been too desperate, too eager for escape to verify beyond all doubt that John was truly dead. But what choice did she have now? The telegram had only just reached her before she boarded the train in St. Louis. She had no money to return, nowhere to go back to even if she could. And if John truly was alive in Denver, what did that mean? Why had he stayed away for 3 years? Why had he let her believe him dead? Caleb helped her into the wagon with a gentleness that made her throat tight. He loaded her trunk and carpet bag into the back, then climbed up beside her and took the reins. As they pulled away from the station and onto the dusty main street of Vulture City, Grace tried to take in her surroundings. The town was rough, as most mining communities were, but there was an energy to it that suggested determination and hope. Buildings lined the street, some well constructed of wood and brick, others little more than tents and false-fronted shacks. Signs advertised saloons, general stores, assay offices, and boarding houses. Men in dusty work clothes moved with purpose, and Grace spotted a few women in practical calico dresses going about their errands. "It is not St. Louis," Caleb said, and there was something apologetic in his tone. "I know it must seem rough to you." "It seems alive," Grace replied honestly. "St. Louis had more polish, perhaps, but also more pretense. I think I prefer honest dust to false glitter." Caleb glanced at her with surprise and something that might have been approval. "Sarah will like you. She has a way of seeing through pretense herself." The words hit harder than he could know. Grace gripped her bag tighter, feeling the telegram inside like a coal burning through the fabric. She should tell him. Right now, before they went any further, she should explain about John, about the telegram, about everything. A good woman, an honest woman, would do exactly that, but fear kept her silent. Fear that he would turn the wagon around immediately and leave her stranded in Vulture City with nothing. Fear that she would see disappointment and anger replace the cautious warmth in his eyes. Fear that she would lose this chance at something better before she even had the opportunity to prove herself worthy of it. So instead, she asked about the ranch, and Caleb talked as they left the town behind and headed into the sprawling Arizona landscape. He told her about his 100 head of cattle, about the constant struggle for water in this dry country, about the summer monsoons that could turn dry washes into raging torrents in minutes. He spoke of Sarah, who was 7 years old and smart as a whip, who had her mother's green eyes and a stubborn streak a mile wide. "I have not been the father she deserves these past 2 years," Caleb admitted as the wagon rattled along the rough track. "Between the ranch and just trying to keep us fed and clothed, I have had little time for the things a child needs. Mrs. Chen has been kind, but Sarah needs more than a neighbor checking in. She needs a mother." "I will do my best," Grace said quietly, and she meant it. Whatever else was uncertain, whatever chaos might be coming, she could at least try to be good to this child who had already lost so much. The ranch, when it came into view, was modest but well kept. A small house of adobe and wood sat nestled against a hillside, with a barn, corral, and several outbuildings nearby. A windmill creaked in the hot breeze, pumping water into a trough where several horses stood in the shade. The land stretched out in all directions, dotted with scrub and cactus, harsh and beautiful in equal measure. A small figure burst from the house as they approached, and Grace recognized Sarah from the description. She was all gangly limbs and dark braids, her dress dusty at the hem, her face bright with curiosity and something more guarded underneath. An older Chinese woman followed more sedately, wiping her hands on her apron. She nodded to Caleb as he brought the wagon to a stop. "Mrs. Chen, this is Grace Kensington," Caleb said, climbing down and then turning to help Grace. Grace, Mrs. Chen has been our savior these past months. Welcome, Mrs. Chen said warmly. I have made stew for supper and prepared the spare room. The spare room, of course. Grace felt heat rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the Arizona sun. She and Caleb had discussed marriage, but the practicalities of it had been left vague in their letters. She was not sure if he expected them to marry immediately or to wait until they knew each other better. The uncertainty added another layer of anxiety to an already overwhelming situation. Sarah stood beside her father, half hiding behind his leg while staring at Grace with frank assessment. Grace knelt down despite the dust, bringing herself to the child's eye level. "Hello, Sarah. I am very pleased to meet you. You talk fancy," Sarah said bluntly. "Papa said you were from the city. I am, but I am hoping to learn to belong here if you will help teach me." Sarah considered this seriously. "Can you cook?" "Yes, though I admit I have never cooked over a wood stove." "Instant." "Louis, I had a different kind of stove." "Can you ride a horse?" "Not well, but I am willing to learn." "Can you shoot?" "Sarah," Caleb said, a note of warning in his voice, but Grace held up a hand. "It is all right. These are fair questions." She looked back at the girl. "I have never handled a gun, but your father is correct that I should probably learn, given where we are." Sarah nodded, apparently satisfied for the moment. "I will show you the chickens. They are mean, but if you are firm with them, they will not peck you." It was perhaps the strangest welcome Grace could have imagined, but there was something reassuring about Sarah's practical assessment of necessary skills. This was a child who understood survival, who had learned to be self-sufficient too young. Grace's heart ached for her. Mrs. Chen departed after showing Grace the spare room, a small but clean space with a narrow bed, a washstand, and hooks on the wall for hanging clothes. Grace unpacked her few belongings, hanging her 2 dresses and setting out her brush and mirror. The telegram she tucked into the bottom of her trunk beneath her extra petticoat, as if hiding it might make the problem disappear. Supper was an awkward affair, the 4 of them sitting around a rough wooden table eating Mrs. Chen's excellent stew. Caleb seemed as nervous as Grace felt, and Sarah filled the silences with chatter about the chickens, the new calf in the barn, and a rattlesnake she had killed with a shovel last week. "Sarah," Caleb said, appalled, "you did not tell me about a rattlesnake." "You were fixing the fence in the north pasture. I handled it. You are 7 years old. You should have come to get me. By the time I found you, it might have gotten into the hen house. I did what needed doing." Sarah's chin lifted stubbornly, and Grace could see the battle of wills brewing between father and daughter. "She was being resourceful," Grace said carefully. "But Sarah, your father is right that some dangers are too great to face alone. What if you had been bitten?" Sarah looked at her with surprise, as if not expecting Grace to take any side but her father's or her own. "I was careful. I am always careful." "I believe you," Grace said, "but being careful and being safe are not always the same thing. Your father worries because he loves you. And I suspect I will worry too, now that I am here." Something flickered across Sarah's face, too quick to name, but she ducked her head and went back to her stew without further argument. After supper, Caleb walked Grace out to watch the sunset from the porch while Sarah reluctantly prepared for bed inside. The sky was ablaze with orange and pink and purple, the heat of the day finally beginning to ease. "I apologize for Sarah," Caleb said quietly. "She has had to be too independent, and I have let it happen because I did not know how to be both father and mother to her." "She is remarkable," Grace said honestly. "Brave and smart and capable. You should be proud." "I am, but I also want her to have a childhood, not just survival." He paused, then turned to face Grace directly. "I want to be honest with you about my expectations. I know we barely know each other, and I do not want to rush you into anything you are not ready for. I thought we might take some time, get acquainted properly, before we formalize our arrangement." Relief flooded through Grace so intensely she felt dizzy. "I think that would be wise. I will sleep in the barn for propriety's sake until we decide otherwise. Mrs. Chen has agreed to come by daily to help chaperone and to ensure there is no talk in town. You are very considerate." "I am trying to do this right." Caleb's voice was rough with sincerity. "My first marriage was a love match, and I know this is different, but I hope we can build something good together, Grace. Something honest and real." The word honest hit like a physical blow. Grace swallowed hard, her fingers clenching in her skirt. This was her moment. She should tell him everything right now before one more minute passed in deception. But when she opened her mouth, what came out was, "I hope so too." Caleb smiled, the expression transforming his weather-worn face into something boyish and hopeful. "Get some rest. Tomorrow I will show you around the ranch properly, and we can begin to figure out how this is all going to work." Grace watched him walk toward the barn, his silhouette dark against the fading light, and felt shame burn through her like poison. He was good. He was honest. He was trying so hard to do right by her, by Sarah, by the situation they had all entered into with hope and faith. And she was lying to him with every breath. That night, Grace lay awake in the narrow bed, staring at the ceiling and listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the desert night. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. The wind rattled something against the side of the house. And in the room next to hers, Sarah's soft breathing was just audible through the thin wall. She had to tell Caleb. Soon. Before this went any further. But first, she needed to know the truth about John. Was he really alive? If so, where had he been and why had he stayed away? Was their marriage even still valid after 3 years of abandonment? Grace knew nothing about the law, about what rights she had or did not have in this situation. Perhaps she could write to St. Louis, try to get more information before saying anything. The telegram had mentioned a letter following. If she could just wait for that letter, she might have more clarity about what she was actually facing. It was a coward's reasoning, and Grace knew it. But it was also the only path she could see that did not end in immediate disaster. So she would wait, just a little while longer, just until she knew more. The decision made, she finally fell into an uneasy sleep. The next weeks fell into a pattern that was both strange and comforting. Grace woke early each morning to help prepare breakfast, learning to manage the wood stove under Mrs. Chen's patient instruction. Caleb would come in from the barn where he had already been working for an hour, and they would eat together with Sarah before he headed out to tend the cattle or repair fences or handle one of the 100 tasks that kept a ranch running. Sarah was initially skeptical of Grace's usefulness, but Grace won her over gradually through persistence and genuine interest. She learned to gather eggs from the temperamental chickens, to milk the cow without getting kicked, to identify the signs of coming rain in the building clouds. Sarah taught her with the same blunt practicality she applied to everything, and Grace found herself genuinely enjoying the girl's company. Caleb was more reserved, but Grace caught him watching her sometimes with an expression that made her heart skip. He was kind always, considerate and respectful, but there was a growing warmth between them that felt dangerous and wonderful in equal measure. They talked in the evenings after Sarah went to bed, sitting on the porch and sharing stories of their pasts. Caleb told her about growing up on a ranch in Texas, about meeting his first wife at a church social, about the joy and terror of becoming a father. Grace told him carefully edited versions of her own history, about her parents who had died when she was young, about working as a seamstress in St. Louis, about the loneliness of city life. She did not tell him about John. The longer she went without mentioning her supposedly dead husband, the harder it became to find the words. And no letter arrived from St. Louis with more information, leaving her in an agonizing limbo of uncertainty. She told herself she was waiting for clarity. But really, she was just falling deeper into a life that might not rightfully be hers to claim. One afternoon, about 3 weeks after her arrival, Grace was in the garden behind the house trying to salvage the struggling vegetable plants when a rider approached the ranch. She shaded her eyes against the sun and saw Caleb riding in from the south pasture, his horse moving at a quick trot. The visitor was a man she did not recognize, dusty from travel and riding a tired-looking horse. Caleb met him near the barn, and even from a distance, Grace could see the tension in the set of Caleb's shoulders. The conversation was brief, and then the rider was turning his horse and heading back toward town. Caleb stood for a long moment, staring after him before slowly walking toward the house. Grace's heart began to pound. Something was wrong. She could see it in every line of Caleb's body. When he reached the garden, he stopped at the edge and looked at her with an expression she could not quite read. "Grace, could you come inside? We need to talk." Her legs felt weak as she set down the watering can and followed him into the house. Sarah was at Mrs. Chen's for the afternoon, learning to make dumplings, so they were alone. Caleb gestured for Grace to sit at the table, then paced the small room for a moment before turning to face her. "That was Tom Watson, who runs the telegraph office in town. He brought a message for you." Caleb pulled a folded paper from his pocket. "It came this morning, and Tom thought it might be important enough to bring out rather than waiting for the next time we came to town." Grace's mouth went dry. "A telegram?" "Yes." Caleb held it out to her, his expression carefully neutral. "I did not read it. It is addressed to you." Her hands shook as she took the paper and unfolded it. The words swam before her eyes, but their meaning was brutally clear. "John confirmed a live stop arriving Vulture City within week. Stop claims legal rights. Stop advise immediate action." Stop. The telegram slipped from Grace's nerveless fingers and fluttered to the floor. Caleb picked it up, and this time he did read it. She watched his face go from concern to confused to something harder and more distant. "John," he said quietly, "your late husband, Caleb, I can explain." "Can you?" He set the telegram on the table with careful precision. "Because from where I am standing, it appears your late husband is not quite as late as you led me to believe." "I thought he was dead." The words burst from Grace in a rush of panic and desperation. "I truly did. He disappeared 3 years ago in a riverboat accident, and everyone said he drowned. I mourned him, Caleb. I wore black for a year, and then I tried to move on with my life." "When did you find out he was alive?" The question was asked in a tone of forced calm that was somehow worse than anger would have been. Grace wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the afternoon heat. "The day I arrived here. There was a telegram waiting for me at the station in St. Louis, but I did not receive it until just before I boarded the train. I did not know what to do. I had no money to return, nowhere to go, and I thought perhaps it was a mistake. Perhaps whoever spotted him was wrong." "So you said nothing?" Caleb's voice was flat. "You came here, met my daughter, accepted my hospitality, and said nothing." "I was afraid," Grace whispered. "I know that is no excuse, but I was so afraid. And I kept thinking I would wait for more information, that I would tell you once I knew for certain what was happening. But then time kept passing, and it became harder and harder to find the words." "How long were you married to him?" 4 years. "We married when I was 19. Did you love him?" The question caught her off guard. Grace looked up to find Caleb watching her with an intensity that stripped away all her careful defenses. "I thought I did at first. He was charming and exciting, and I was young and naive. But he was also reckless and dishonest. He gambled away every penny we had and then some. He made promises he never kept and told lies as easily as breathing. By the time he disappeared, I was not sure if I would mourn the loss of my husband or celebrate my freedom. And now he is coming here. So it seems. Grace felt tears burning behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. I am so sorry, Caleb. You and Sarah have been nothing but kind to me, and I have repaid you with deception. I understand if you want me to leave. Caleb was silent for a long moment, his jaw working as if he was chewing over words too bitter to speak. Finally, he said, "Where would you go? I do not know. Back to St. Louis, I suppose, or somewhere else. It does not matter. It matters to Sarah. She is becoming attached to you." The words hit like a physical blow. I am attached to her too, to both of you. I know I have no right to say that after what I have done, but it is true. Caleb moved to the window and stared out at the ranch he had built with his own hands. I do not know what the law says about a situation like this. If he abandoned you for 3 years, perhaps you have grounds to dissolve the marriage. But I am not a lawyer, and even if you do, these things take time. I know. He could cause trouble for you, for all of us. If he is the man you describe, he might see an opportunity to profit from this somehow. Grace had not let herself think that far ahead, but she knew Caleb was right. John had never been above blackmail or manipulation when it served his interests. The thought of him inserting himself into this new life she had begun to build made her feel physically ill. "I will handle him," she said, though she had no idea how. "I will make sure he does not cause problems for you or Sarah. This is my mess, and I will clean it up." Caleb turned from the window and looked at her with an expression that was equal parts frustration and something softer. "Grace, you have been living here for 3 weeks. You eat at my table, care for my daughter, and work from sunup to sundown helping to keep this place running. Like it or not, your mess is now my mess too. That is not fair to you. Fair or not, it is the reality." He rubbed a hand over his face, suddenly looking exhausted. "I need some time to think about this, to figure out what our options are. Of course." Grace stood, her legs unsteady. "Should I pack my things?" "No." The word was sharp, decisive. "You stay put until we figure this out. Sarah would be devastated if you just disappeared, and I will not do that to her. We will handle this like adults, with planning and consideration for everyone involved." It was more than Grace deserved, and they both knew it. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Caleb headed for the door, then paused with his hand on the frame. "For what it is worth, I believe you when you say you thought he was dead, and I understand why you were afraid to tell me. But Grace, if we are going to have any chance of getting through this, you cannot keep secrets from me anymore. No matter how scared you are, I need you to be honest with me from here on out. Can you do that?" "Yes," Grace promised. "No more secrets." He nodded once and then was gone, striding toward the barn with the same determined purpose he brought to everything. Grace sank back into her chair and finally let the tears fall. The next few days were tense and uncomfortable. Caleb was not angry exactly, but he was distant in a way that hurt more than shouting would have. He was polite, considerate even, but the easy warmth that had been growing between them was gone. Sarah noticed the change immediately, and Grace watched the girl's confusion turn to wariness. Children always knew when adults were lying, even if they could not articulate what felt wrong. Grace tried to maintain normalcy, but it was impossible when Caleb barely looked at her and spent every available moment working himself to exhaustion on the ranch. Mrs. Chen, wise woman that she was, asked no questions but offered quiet support through her presence in cooking. Grace was grateful for her tact. 5 days after the second telegram arrived, a third rider came from town. This time it was Sheriff Porter, a grizzled man in his 50s who had been enforcing law in Vulture City since its mining boom began. "Caleb," he said, touching his hat brim. "Mrs. Kensington. I thought you should know there is a man in town asking after Grace Kensington, formerly of St. Louis. Says he is her husband." Grace felt the blood drain from her face. Caleb's expression went very still. "What did you tell him?" Caleb asked. "Nothing yet. I wanted to talk to you first, see what the situation was." The sheriff looked at Grace with sympathy. "Madam, is this man actually your husband?" "I thought he was dead," Grace said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He disappeared 3 years ago, and everyone believed he had drowned. I only found out he was alive after I arrived here." "And now he has shown up claiming his legal rights," the sheriff said grimly. "I am going to be straight with you folks. Legally speaking, if he can prove you were married and never divorced, he has rights as her husband. Not rights I would want any woman subject to, based on what I have seen of this fellow in town, but rights nonetheless." "What is he like?" Caleb asked. "Slick, smooth talker. Already been in the saloon telling stories and making friends. But there is something underneath that does not sit right with me. I have been doing this job long enough to recognize a man looking for an angle." "He is a gambler and a con man," Grace said bitterly. "Whatever he wants from me, it is not love or reconciliation. He wants something, and he will not leave until he gets it. Then we need to find out what that is and find a way to give it to him that does not involve you," Caleb said. He looked at the sheriff. "Can you keep him in town for a bit? Tell him you need time to verify his story or something. I can probably buy you a day or two, but not much more. If he wants to come out here, I cannot legally stop him. A day or two is enough. Thank you, Sheriff." After the lawman left, Caleb turned to Grace with the first real fire she had seen in his eyes since the telegram arrived. "Tell me everything about him. Every detail you can remember about how he operates, what he cares about, what his weaknesses are." Grace spent the next hour laying bare the sordid details of her marriage to John Kensington. She told Caleb about the gambling debts, the creditors who came pounding on their door, the times John had sold her belongings to fund his next game. She described his charm, the way he could talk his way out of almost anything, and his complete lack of conscience when it came to using people for his own ends. "But he is also a coward," she said finally. "When things got truly dangerous, when he owed money to men who would not be put off with promises, John always ran. That riverboat trip was not pleasure. He was fleeing St. Louis because he had gotten in too deep with the wrong people." "So what changed?" Caleb mused. "Why would he surface now after hiding for 3 years? I do not know, but it must be something significant to risk coming out of whatever hole he has been hiding in. Maybe someone found him, forced him out, or maybe he heard you had prospects out here and thought he could cash in." The thought made Grace feel sick. "I have nothing for him to take." "No, but I do." Caleb's voice was grim. "A ranch, cattle, land. If he is legally your husband, he might have claim to anything you acquire, including through another marriage." "This is not your problem," Grace said desperately. "I will go to town, face him, and make it clear that he gets nothing from me." "And you think he will just accept that and leave?" Caleb shook his head. "Men like that do not give up easy, especially if they think there is money to be made. No, we need a better plan." "We?" Caleb looked at her directly for the first time in days, and Grace saw determination in his eyes along with something warmer. "You were right that this is not my problem, but Sarah loves you, Grace. In 3 weeks, you have given her something I could not, gentle care and female guidance and hope for a real family again. I will not let some 2-bit con man destroy that without a fight. Caleb." Grace's voice broke on his name. "Besides," he continued, a hint of something that might have been a smile touching his lips, "I have been alone for 2 years, and in 3 weeks with you I have remembered what it is like to have a partner. Someone to talk to at the end of the day, someone who shares the work and the worry. I am not ready to give that up either. Even though I lied to you, you should have told me sooner, and we will have to work on trust going forward. But I understand why you were afraid, and I believe you when you say you thought he was dead. Caleb reached across the table and took her hand, the first physical contact they had shared since the telegram arrived. We will fix this together, Grace. I just need you to trust me now the way I am choosing to trust you. Grace looked down at their joined hands, his rough and calloused from work, hers smaller and scarred from learning new tasks. Something fierce and protective and hopeful bloomed in her chest. I trust you, she whispered. Good. Now here is what we are going to do. Caleb's plan was risky but simple. Grace would go into town the next day and meet with John in a public place, the hotel restaurant where Sheriff Porter could keep an eye on things. She would find out what John wanted and make it clear that their marriage was over. Caleb would be nearby but out of sight, ready to intervene if things went badly. The key is not to let him know about me or the ranch, Caleb explained. If he thinks you are just a struggling widow trying to make ends meet, he might lose interest faster. And if he does not, then we move to more permanent solutions. There are lawyers in Tucson who handle divorce cases. It will cost money and take time, but if he abandoned you for 3 years, you should have grounds. I do not have money for a lawyer. I do. Caleb's tone left no room for argument. Consider it an investment in our future, assuming we have one. The assumption hung in the air between them, weighted with possibility. Grace wanted to ask what he meant, what kind of future he imagined, but this was not the time. First, they had to deal with the ghost of her past. The next morning, Grace dressed in her plainest dress and took the wagon into Vulture City with Caleb driving. Sarah had been told only that Grace had business in town and had accepted this with the easy faith of childhood. Mrs. Chen had promised to keep the girl occupied for the day. The ride was quiet, both of them tense with anticipation. When they reached town, Caleb helped her down from the wagon and spoke quietly. I will be at the general store across the street. You can see me through the window if you need to. Sheriff Porter will be having his lunch in the restaurant, so he will be right there. If you feel threatened at any point, you just stand up and walk out. Understand? Yes. Grace tried to smile but knew it came out more like a grimace. I can do this. I know you can. You are stronger than you think. He squeezed her hand briefly, then stepped back. Good luck. The hotel restaurant was a modest establishment, clean but worn, with a few tables scattered across a small dining room. Grace arrived precisely at noon, as the telegram from John had specified. She chose a table near the window where she could see the street and folded her hands in her lap to keep them from shaking. She did not have to wait long. At 12:05, the door opened and John Kensington walked in. 3 years had changed him, but not as much as Grace might have hoped. He was still handsome in a smooth, polished way that had once made her heart race. His dark hair was neatly trimmed, his suit well-tailored though showing signs of wear. He moved with the easy confidence of a man who had never doubted his ability to charm his way through life. When he saw her, his face broke into a smile that did not reach his eyes. Grace, my dear wife, you look well, John. She kept her voice level, refusing to show the turmoil roiling inside her. You look alive. He laughed at that, actually laughed, as if the 3 years of grief and uncertainty he had put her through were nothing but an amusing misunderstanding. I know my disappearance must have been difficult for you, darling. Please, let me explain. He sat down across from her without waiting for an invitation. Up close, Grace could see the lines around his eyes, the tension in his smile. Whatever he had been doing these past 3 years, it had not been easy. I am listening, she said. John launched into a story about the riverboat accident, claiming he had been swept downstream and rescued by a farmer who nursed him back to health. He spoke of amnesia, of slowly regaining his memory over months and years, of desperately trying to find his way back to her. It was a good story, delivered with just the right amount of emotion and regret. If Grace had not known him so well, she might have believed it. But she could see the calculation behind his eyes, the way he was watching her reactions and adjusting his performance accordingly. "That is quite a tale," she said when he finally paused for breath. "How convenient that your memory returned just now." Something flickered across his face, there and gone in an instant. "I understand your skepticism. I know I hurt you by being gone so long. But I am here now and we can start fresh, together the way we were always meant to be." "Why now, John? What do you really want?" He tried to look wounded. "Is it so hard to believe I want my wife back?" "Yes," Grace said bluntly. "You never wanted me when you had me. I was just a convenience, someone to manage the household and pacify the creditors while you gambled away everything we had. So tell me the truth. Why are you here?" John's mask slipped just for a moment and Grace saw the calculation underneath. "Fine. You want honesty. I heard you had landed on your feet out here, got yourself set up as some rich rancher's bride. I figure as your legal husband, I am entitled to part of that arrangement." There it was, the ugly truth beneath the charming smile. Grace felt anger rise up to replace her fear. "I am not marrying any rich rancher. I am working as a seamstress, barely making enough to feed myself. You traveled all this way for nothing." "I do not believe you." John leaned forward, his voice dropping to something harder. "I made inquiries. You were corresponding with a Caleb Youngblood, rancher outside of town. The telegraph operator mentioned that Youngblood has been picking up messages for you. So do not lie to me, Grace. I may be many things, but I am not stupid." Grace forced herself to remain calm. "I did correspond with Mr. Youngblood, but when I arrived and he learned I might not be a widow after all, the arrangement fell through. I have been making my own way since." It was a weak lie, and they both knew it. But before John could press further, Sheriff Porter stood up from his table across the room and wandered over with his coffee cup. "Afternoon, folks. Just wanted to make sure everything is going well over here." John's expression smoothed back into charming affability. "Perfectly well, Sheriff. Just having a reunion with my dear wife." "That right?" Porter looked at Grace with raised eyebrows. "You doing all right, madam?" "Yes, thank you, Sheriff." Grace kept her voice steady. Porter nodded slowly, his eyes on John. "Well, I will be right over there if you need anything." "Anything at all." The warning was clear. John's smile tightened, but he maintained his pleasant facade until the sheriff moved away. Then he turned back to Grace with something ugly in his expression. "Playing it careful, are you? Got the local law watching out for you?" "I am a woman alone in a rough town. Of course I am being careful." "Alone." John tasted the word. "For now. But see, here is the thing, Grace. You are not alone. You are married. To me. And unless you can produce divorce papers, that is not going to change. We can fix that easily enough. You abandoned me for 3 years. Any judge would grant a divorce under those circumstances. Maybe. But divorces take time and money. You got money for a lawyer, Grace, because I surely do not." He leaned back in his chair, looking pleased with himself. "Of course, I might be willing to go away quietly if the right incentive presented itself. And there it was, blackmail, pure and simple." Grace felt her hands clench in her lap. "How much?" $500. It was an enormous sum, more than most people out here saw in a year. Grace laughed bitterly. "I do not have $500. I do not have $50. Then I guess I will be sticking around town for a while, getting to know the locals. Maybe having some conversations with this Caleb Youngblood, see what his intentions are toward my wife." John's smile was poisonous. "I am sure we can all come to some arrangement that works for everyone." Grace stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. She could feel eyes turning toward them, but she did not care. "You stay away from him. Stay away from all of us." "Or what?" "You will have the sheriff arrest me for talking to people, for claiming my legal rights as your husband." John stood as well, his voice rising. "You made vows, Grace, in sickness and in health until death do us part, and I am not dead yet. Mrs. Kensington." Sheriff Porter was there suddenly, his hand on his gun belt in a casual but unmistakable gesture. "I think you have had enough conversation for one day. Let me walk you back to your wagon." Grace nodded stiffly and turned to leave. Behind her, she heard John call out, "This is not over, Grace. We are still married, and I am not going anywhere." The words followed her out into the hot afternoon sun like a curse. Caleb was already waiting by the wagon, his expression dark as he took in her shaken state. He helped her up without a word, thanked the sheriff, and then drove them out of town at a pace just short of reckless. They were a mile outside of Vulture City before either of them spoke. $500, Grace said flatly. "That is what he wants to go away quietly." Caleb's jaw tightened. "Of course it is. Men like him always want money." "I do not have it. Even if we went through with the marriage, I could not ask you to pay that kind of sum to make my problems disappear." "It is not just your problem anymore." Caleb's voice was hard. "He threatened to cause trouble for me too. That makes it my concern." "Caleb, no. This is exactly what he wants, to manipulate you into paying him off. There has to be another way." "Like what?" "A divorce will cost nearly as much and take months. In that time, he will make both our lives miserable." Grace knew he was right, but the thought of John profiting from the pain he had caused made her sick. "There has to be something else we can do." They rode in silence for a while, both lost in thought. When they reached the ranch, Sarah came running out to greet them, and Grace had to paste on a smile and pretend everything was fine. Caleb went to tend the horses while Grace helped Sarah with her chores, trying to focus on the simple tasks instead of the impossible situation. That evening, after Sarah was in bed, Grace found Caleb sitting on the porch staring out at the darkening landscape. She sat down beside him, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, Caleb said, "I have been thinking about what your husband said, about you being married until death do you part." Grace felt her heart sink. "You think I should go back to him?" "What? No." Caleb turned to her, surprise clear on his face even in the dim light. "No, Grace, that is not what I meant at all. I was thinking about the marriage itself, whether it is even still valid." "What do you mean? You said he was running from debts in St. Louis when he disappeared. What if he did not just disappear? What if he actually died somewhere and someone is impersonating him now?" Grace blinked. "That seems far-fetched, maybe. Or what if he used a false name when you married? If the marriage was never legal to begin with, then you would be free." "I saw the marriage certificate. John Kensington was the name on it. But how do you know that was his real name?" Caleb was warming to his theory now. "Con men use false identities all the time. If we could prove he married you under a false name, the marriage would be void." It was a slim hope, but hope nonetheless. Grace turned it over in her mind. "I do not know. His name was always John Kensington to me. His family was from somewhere back east, but I never met them. He said they were dead. Convenient." Caleb stood and began to pace. "Is there anyone from his past who might know the truth? Someone we could contact? There was a man he used to gamble with regularly, Marcus something. He might know more about John's background, but I have no idea how to find him." "What about the riverboat company? If John was on a boat that had an accident, there would be records. passenger lists, insurance claims. We might be able to find out if he really was on that boat or if the whole thing was a lie. Grace felt a flutter of real hope for the first time since this nightmare began. That could work, but it would take time, and he is already here causing trouble. Then we buy time. Caleb turned to face her, his expression determined. I will go to town tomorrow and tell him I am willing to discuss a settlement. String him along for a few days while we make inquiries. He is a gambler, right? He will be drawn to the poker games in the saloons. If we can keep him distracted and occupied, he might not cause too much trouble while we figure out our next move. It is risky. Everything about this situation is risky. Caleb came to sit beside her again, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. But I meant what I said, Grace. We will fix this together. I am not letting you face him alone, and I am not giving up on what we have been building here. What have we been building? Grace asked softly. We barely know each other. I know you are good with Sarah. I know you work harder than most men I have met. I know you make me laugh, and you are not afraid to speak your mind. I know that when I come in from a long day of work, seeing you at the stove making supper makes this house feel like a home for the first time in 2 years. Caleb's voice was rough with emotion. Maybe that is not knowing everything, but it is knowing what matters. Grace felt tears prick her eyes. I lied to you, and I am choosing to forgive you. Now the question is whether you can forgive yourself and move forward. He reached out and took her hand. I am not my late wife, Grace. I am not looking for a perfect romance or grand passion. I am looking for a partner, someone who will stand with me through the hard times and share the good ones. Someone who will be a mother to Sarah and build a life here in this rough country. Can you be that person? I want to be, Grace whispered. But what if John destroys everything before we have a chance? Then we will build it again. Caleb squeezed her hand. I am a rancher, Grace. I have survived droughts, stampedes, and market crashes. I have watched my wife die and raised a daughter alone. I am not easily defeated, and something tells me you are stronger than you think too. Grace looked at their joined hands, thinking of all the ways this could go wrong. But she thought also of Sarah's laughter, of the satisfaction of a good day's work, of the way Caleb's smile made her feel like maybe she could be someone better than she had been. All right, she said. We try. But Caleb, if things get too dangerous, if John threatens you or Sarah, I will leave. I will not put you at risk for my mistakes. That is not your decision to make alone anymore. We are in this together now, whether you like it or not. Caleb stood and pulled her to her feet. Come on. Tomorrow is going to be a long day and we both need rest. Grace nodded and started to turn toward the house, but Caleb caught her hand again. When she looked back, he was watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. For what it is worth, he said quietly, I am glad you are here. Even with all this mess, I am glad you came. So am I, Grace said, and meant it with all her heart. The next morning, Caleb rode into town early while Grace stayed at the ranch with Sarah. The plan was for him to approach John casually, man to man, and suggest they might be able to work out an arrangement. Meanwhile, Grace had a different task. She spent the morning composing careful letters. One to the riverboat company in St. Louis, inquiring about the passenger list from the boat that had supposedly carried John Kensington in 1879. Another to the courthouse in St. Louis, requesting a copy of her marriage certificate. And a third to an old friend who had known both Grace and John, asking if she remembered anything unusual about John's background or family. It was a long shot, but it was all Grace could think to do. She rode into town in the afternoon to post the letters, then stopped by the telegraph office to see if there were any other messages waiting for her. There were none, which was both a relief and a disappointment. On her way back through town, Grace spotted Caleb's horse tied outside the saloon. Through the window, she could see him sitting at a table with John and several other men, cards spread before them. It looked casual, friendly even, but Grace knew better. This was reconnaissance, Caleb getting the measure of her supposed husband while keeping him occupied. She drove back to the ranch feeling unsettled. Seeing the two men together, the two most important men in her life even if in vastly different ways, made the situation feel too real and too dangerous. Sarah noticed her mood at supper. "You are quiet," the girl observed with her typical bluntness. "Are you sick?" "Just tired, sweetheart. It has been a long day. Papa has been gone a lot lately. Is something wrong?" Grace's heart ached. Children always knew when adults were keeping secrets. "Your father has some business in town that is taking extra time, but everything will be fine." Sarah did not look convinced, but she let it drop. Later, as Grace was tucking her into bed, the girl suddenly said, "I like having you here. I hope you do not leave like Mama did." The words hit Grace like a physical blow. "Oh, Sarah, your Mama did not want to leave you. She got sick, and sometimes sickness is too strong even for the people we love." "I know, but I still miss her." Sarah's voice was small in the darkening room. "And I would miss you too if you left, so please do not leave." Grace smoothed the girl's hair back from her face, tears burning in her eyes. "I will do everything in my power to stay, sweetheart. That is a promise." It was a promise she prayed she could keep. Caleb returned late that night, looking exhausted. Grace was still up, mending one of Sarah's dresses by lamplight, and she looked up anxiously as he came in. "How did it go?" "He is exactly as you described. Charming, manipulative, and always looking for an angle." Caleb poured himself water from the pitcher and drank deeply. "I let him win a bit at cards, gained his confidence. He thinks I am just a simple rancher who might be swayed with the right approach." "What did he say about me?" "Mostly complained about how you were being unreasonable. Painted himself as the wronged husband who just wants his wife back." A few of the men seemed to buy it, but Sheriff Porter has been spreading word about the real situation. "Most folks are on your side." "That will just make John angrier." "Probably. But it also means he cannot operate freely. People are watching him." Caleb sat down heavily in the chair across from her. "I told him I might be willing to help negotiate a settlement between you two, maybe provide some financial assistance to help you both start fresh. He is interested but suspicious. I am meeting with him again tomorrow to discuss details." "Be careful, Caleb. John is dangerous when he feels cornered." "I can handle myself, but I appreciate your concern." He smiled tiredly. "How was your day?" Grace told him about the letter she had sent, and Caleb nodded approval. "Good thinking. Even if they do not give us what we need, they might provide leverage. It will take weeks to get responses. Then we stall for weeks. John seems to be enjoying himself in town. As long as he thinks there is money to be made, he will stay patient." Grace set down her mending and looked at Caleb seriously. "You do not have to do this. Fight my battles for me." "I know I do not have to. I want to." Caleb's voice was firm. "You are part of this family now, Grace, and we protect our own." The words settled over Grace like a warm blanket. Family. It was something she had not had since her parents died, something she had thought she might never have again. The fact that Caleb was offering it to her, even knowing all her flaws and mistakes, made her want to be worthy of it. "Thank you," she whispered. "No thanks necessary. Just keep trusting me, and we will get through this." Over the next week, an uneasy routine developed. Caleb would spend his mornings working the ranch, then ride into town in the afternoons to gamble with John and the other men. He lost more often than he won, which Grace knew was intentional. He was playing a role, the friendly rancher with more money than sense, and John was eating it up. Meanwhile, Grace threw herself into ranch work with renewed determination. She learned to ride better, to help with the cattle when needed, to manage the household with increasing confidence. Sarah thrived under her care, becoming more open and affectionate as the days passed. It was almost possible to forget the sword hanging over their heads. Then, 9 days after Grace posted her letters, a response arrived. Caleb brought it back from town along with several other pieces of mail. Grace's hands shook as she opened the envelope from her friend in St. Louis. The letter was short but illuminating. "Grace, I have been thinking about your questions regarding John. Something occurred to me that I thought you should know. Do you remember how he always refused to let you visit his supposed family back east? How he claimed they were all dead, yet sometimes he would slip and mention an uncle or cousin who was still living? I always found that odd. Also, a man came looking for him about 6 months after he disappeared. Said his real name was not John Kensington but John Kellerman, and that he had left debts and a wife back in Philadelphia. I did not know how to reach you to tell you, and eventually I assumed it did not matter since John was dead. But if he is alive now, perhaps this information is useful. Be careful, dear friend. That man is more dangerous than you ever knew." Grace read the letter 3 times, her heart pounding harder with each pass. She handed it to Caleb without a word. His expression grew dark as he read. "John Kellerman. If he married you under a false name, the marriage is not legal. But how do we prove it? We have a letter from a friend, but that is not exactly solid evidence. No, but it is a lead. If we can find records from Philadelphia, proof that John Kellerman existed and was already married when he married you, then we can prove your marriage was bigamous and therefore void." Hope flared bright in Grace's chest. "How do we get records from Philadelphia?" "We write to the courthouse there, same as you did in St. Louis. But Grace, this could take weeks or even months, and in the meantime, John is still here causing problems. Then we use this information to our advantage." Grace's mind was racing now. "We tell him we know about Philadelphia. About John Kellerman. We bluff, make him think we have more evidence than we do. He is a con man, he will understand leverage and pressure." Caleb looked doubtful. "Or he will get violent. Cornered animals are dangerous. So are desperate women." Grace met his eyes steadily. "I am tired of running and hiding and letting him control this situation. It is time to go on the offensive. Grace. I know it is risky. But Caleb, we cannot keep living like this. Sarah is starting to sense something is wrong. The longer this drags out, the worse it gets for everyone. We need to end this one way or another." Caleb was silent for a long moment, clearly torn. Finally, he nodded slowly. "All right. But we do this carefully, with witnesses and in a public place. I will not have you alone with him." "Agreed." They spent that evening crafting their strategy. Caleb would arrange a meeting at the hotel restaurant again, with Sheriff Porter present. Grace would confront John with what she knew and demand he leave Vulture City immediately. If he refused, she would threaten to expose him as a bigamist and fraud. It was not much of a plan, but it was all they had. The meeting was set for noon 2 days later. Grace dressed carefully that morning, choosing her most severe dress and pinning her hair back tightly. She wanted to look strong, composed, untouchable. Caleb drove her into town, and this time Sarah came along, staying with Mrs. Chen at her small house near the edge of Vulture City. "You can do this," Caleb said as they approached the hotel. "Just remember, Porter and I are both right there. He cannot hurt you." Grace nodded, trying to project confidence she did not entirely feel. She walked into the restaurant with her head high and found John already waiting, looking smug and well-rested. "Grace, my dear, so good of you to agree to another meeting. I hope this means you have come to your senses." She sat down across from him without preamble. "I know who you really are, John, or should I say John Kellerman. The effect was immediate and satisfying. All the color drained from John's face and his confident smile faltered. "I do not know what you are talking about." "Do not insult my intelligence. I know about Philadelphia. I know about your first wife, the one you were still married to when you married me. I know our marriage was a fraud from the beginning." John recovered quickly, his expression hardening. "You cannot prove any of that, can I not? I have letters from people who knew you back then. I have inquiries pending with courthouses in both Philadelphia and St. Louis. It is only a matter of time before I have documented proof that you are a bigamist and a fraud." Grace leaned forward. "So here is what is going to happen. You are going to leave Vulture City today. You are going to disappear again, just like you did 3 years ago, and in exchange, I will not report you to the authorities or pursue charges that could land you in prison for a very long time." John's eyes narrowed dangerously. "You little witch. You think you can threaten me? I am not threatening. I am stating facts." Grace kept her voice level despite her racing heart. "You have no legal claim to me, to anything I have, or to anyone in my life. Leave now while you still can." For a moment, Grace thought he might lunge across the table at her. His hands clenched into fists, and fury twisted his features into something ugly. But then Sheriff Porter stood up from his table across the room and started walking toward them, and John seemed to remember where he was. "You are making a mistake," he hissed. "I could ruin you. Tell everyone in this town what kind of woman you really are. Go ahead. Tell them I am a woman who was deceived by a con man and a bigamist. Tell them I am a woman who had the courage to escape and build a new life." "I think they will be sympathetic." Grace stood. "You have until sundown to be out of Vulture City. After that, I go to the sheriff with everything I know." She turned and walked out of the restaurant without waiting for his response. Her legs were shaking so badly she could barely make it to the street, but she kept her spine straight and her head high until she was outside. Caleb was there immediately, his hand on her elbow steadying her. "You did perfectly. He is furious. Let him be furious somewhere else." Caleb guided her toward the wagon. "Porter is going to escort him out of town personally, make sure he gets on the evening stage. If Kellerman tries to come back, he will be arrested for trespassing. What if he does not go? What if he calls our bluff? Then we follow through on the threat. We report him, and we deal with whatever comes." Caleb helped her into the wagon. "But my gut says he will run. Men like that always do when they realize the game is up." Grace wanted to believe him, but years of experience with John had taught her that he was at his most dangerous when cornered. As they drove through town to collect Sarah from Mrs. Chen's house, Grace could not shake the feeling that this was not over. Sarah chattered happily about her afternoon making dumplings with Mrs. Chen, oblivious to the tension radiating from both adults. They headed back toward the ranch and Grace tried to relax. Maybe Caleb was right. Maybe John would take the easy way out and just leave. They were about halfway home when Caleb suddenly pulled the wagon to a stop. "What is it?" Grace asked, following his gaze. Ahead on the road leading to the ranch, a rider was waiting. Even from a distance, Grace recognized John's horse. "Stay here," Caleb said, handing Grace the reins. "Both of you stay in the wagon." "Caleb, no, he is dangerous, which is why you and Sarah are staying put." Caleb climbed down and started walking toward the waiting rider, his hand resting casually on his hip near where Grace knew he kept a revolver. Grace watched with her heart in her throat as the two men faced each other on the dusty road. She could not hear what they were saying, but she could see the tension in both their postures. John was gesturing wildly, clearly agitated. Caleb stood perfectly still, immovable as a rock. Then John went for his gun. It happened so fast that Grace barely had time to scream. John's hand went to his belt, pulling a small pistol from beneath his jacket. But Caleb was faster, his own gun clearing leather and firing in one smooth motion. The sound echoed across the desert like thunder. John jerked backward, the pistol falling from his hand as he clutched his shoulder. He staggered, then fell, his horse shying away from the noise and smell of gunpowder. Sarah was screaming. Grace was screaming. Caleb was already running forward, kicking John's pistol away and dropping to his knees beside the fallen man. "Sarah, cover your eyes," Grace ordered, climbing down from the wagon on shaking legs. "Do not look." But Sarah was already looking, her face pale and shocked. Grace wrapped her arms around the girl, holding her tight while keeping her turned away from the violence. Caleb called back, "He is alive. Shoulder wound, clean through. We need to get him to the doctor in town." The next few hours passed in a blur of chaos and fear. They loaded John into the back of the wagon, his face gray with pain and shock. Caleb drove like a madman back to Vulture City, while Grace tried to keep pressure on the wound and Sarah huddled in the corner, crying softly. Sheriff Porter met them at the doctor's office, having heard the gunshot from town. While the doctor worked on John, Caleb gave his statement about the shooting. Self-defense, clear and simple. John had drawn first, had been waiting in ambush. Multiple witnesses could testify to his threats earlier in the day. "He will live," the doctor reported eventually. "But he will be in no condition to travel for at least a week, which gives us time to verify the story about Philadelphia," Porter said grimly. "If what you told me is true, Mrs. Kensington, this man has a lot more to answer for than just pulling a gun." Grace nodded numbly. Now that the immediate danger was past, reaction was setting in. She felt cold despite the evening heat, and her hands would not stop shaking. Caleb found her sitting on the doctor's porch while Sarah dozed fitfully inside. He sat down beside her and took her hand without a word. "I am sorry you had to do that," Grace said quietly. "Shoot him." "I am not. He was going to kill me, Grace. Maybe you and Sarah too. I did what I had to do to protect my family." Caleb's voice was steady, but Grace could see the strain around his eyes. "Taking a life, even in self-defense, even when it was necessary, left scars." "Your family," Grace repeated softly. "Yes, my family. If that is all right with you." Grace looked at this man who had taken her in when she had nowhere else to go, who had chosen to stand by her despite her lies, who had just put his own life on the line to protect her. She thought about Sarah inside, the little girl who had lost one mother and was desperately trying not to lose another. She thought about the ranch, the harsh, beautiful land, the life they were building together. "More than all right," she whispered. Caleb pulled her close, and Grace let herself lean against his strength. They sat like that as the sun set over Vulture City, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, and for the first time since she stepped off that train, Grace felt like maybe everything was going to be okay. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of legal proceedings and revelations. The sheriff sent telegrams to Philadelphia and received confirmation that John Kellerman had indeed been married there in 1875, 4 years before his supposed marriage to Grace. His first wife was still living, which made Grace's marriage not just fraudulent but criminal on John's part. When confronted with the evidence, John tried to bargain, then to threaten, and finally to plead. But the law was clear. He had committed bigamy, attempted murder, and fraud. He would be going to prison for a very long time. Grace attended his hearing, not out of any lingering affection, but because she needed to see it end. She needed to watch the judge declare her marriage null and void, to hear officially that she was free. Caleb was beside her the entire time, a silent pillar of support. When it was over, when John had been led away in chains still protesting his innocence, Grace walked out of the courthouse into the bright Arizona sunshine, a free woman for the first time in years. "How do you feel?" Caleb asked. "Light," Grace said and laughed because it was true. "Like I could float away." "Well, do not. I have plans for you." "Oh," Caleb looked suddenly nervous, this confident rancher who had faced down a gunman without flinching. He took her hand and led her away from the courthouse, around the corner to a quiet spot beneath a cottonwood tree. "Grace, these past weeks have been the hardest of my life except for when I lost my first wife, but they have also shown me something important. They showed me that I want you in my life, not as a convenience or a mail-order arrangement, but as a real partner. As my wife, if you will have me." Grace felt tears spring to her eyes. "Caleb, I want that too, but are you sure?" "After everything that happened, all the lies and danger I brought to your door, I am sure. Because you faced all of that with courage and honesty once you decided to stop running. Because Sarah loves you and you love her. Because when I imagine my future, you are in it." Caleb reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple gold band. "This was my grandmother's ring. It is not fancy, but it is real and it has lasted through generations, like I hope we will." "Yes," Grace said through her tears. "Yes, I will marry you." Caleb slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting all along for her to claim it. Then he kissed her, gentle and sweet, a promise of all the days to come. They were married a week later in a simple ceremony at the small church in Vulture City. Sarah stood up with them, beaming with pride in her new dress. Mrs. Chen and Sheriff Porter were witnesses, along with half the town who had become invested in the outcome of Grace's story. The preacher pronounced them husband and wife, and this time there was no fraud, no deception. Just two people choosing to build a life together with open eyes and honest hearts. The reception was held at the ranch, with tables set up in the yard and food brought by neighbors eager to celebrate. Grace stood beside Caleb, greeting guests and accepting congratulations, and felt happiness bloom in her chest like a flower after rain. Sarah tugged on her skirt. "Can I call you Mama now?" Grace knelt down and pulled the girl into a fierce hug. "I would be honored if you did." "Good. Because I already told everyone you were my new mama, and it would be embarrassing if you said no." Grace laughed and kissed the top of Sarah's head. "I love you, sweetheart. I love you too, Mama." When the guests finally departed and the stars came out over the Arizona desert, Caleb and Grace stood on their porch watching Sarah chase fireflies in the yard. The girl's laughter rang out clear and bright, the sound of childhood joy too long absent from this place. "Thank you," Grace said softly. "For what? For not giving up on me. For saying we would fix it together and then actually doing it." Caleb pulled her close, his arm around her waist. "I told you we were in this together. I meant it then and I mean it now. Whatever comes, we face it as a family." "A family," Grace repeated, savoring the word. "I like the sound of that." They stood together as the night deepened and Sarah eventually tired of her game, coming to stand between them and take each of their hands. Together, the three of them went inside to the home they were building, day by day, choice by choice. The first year of their marriage was not easy, but it was good. The ranch demanded constant work, and there were struggles with drought and market prices, and 100 other challenges that came with ranching in the Arizona territory. But they faced each one together, Caleb and Grace working side by side while Sarah grew taller and more confident under their combined care. Grace learned to ride well enough to help with the cattle when needed. She expanded the garden, turning the struggling plot into something productive through sheer determination and help from Mrs. Chen. She made friends in town, women who had their own stories of hardship and survival, who welcomed her into their circle with open arms. Caleb taught her to shoot, though she never grew to love guns the way some frontier women did. But she became competent enough to defend herself and the ranch if needed, and that was enough. Sarah flourished with two parents to love her. She remained stubborn and independent, but she also learned to trust that Grace and Caleb would be there when she needed them. Her laughter became a common sound around the ranch, a melody that made all the hard work worthwhile. In the spring of their second year together, Grace realized she was pregnant. She told Caleb one evening after Sarah had gone to bed, nervous about his reaction. They had never discussed having more children, and she was not sure if he wanted to expand their family. But Caleb's face lit up with such pure joy that all her worries evaporated. He picked her up and spun her around, laughing like a boy. "A baby! We are having a baby! You are happy!" Happy does not even begin to cover it. Caleb set her down gently, his hands cradling her face. "Grace, you have given me back my life, my hope, my future. A child is just one more blessing in a long line of them." Sarah was equally thrilled when they told her, immediately declaring that she wanted a brother. "I already know how to be a big sister to a boy," she announced with the confidence of a 9-year-old who had given the matter serious thought. The pregnancy progressed without major complications, though the Arizona summer heat made Grace miserable in her final months. Caleb fussed over her like a mother hen, trying to keep her from doing too much work, while Grace insisted she was perfectly capable of managing the household as always. "I am pregnant, not made of glass," she told him more than once, exasperated and touched by his concern in equal measure. Their son was born in late October of 1884, a healthy boy with his father's brown eyes and a set of lungs that announced his arrival to half the county. They named him Matthew after Caleb's father, and Sarah declared him absolutely perfect despite his tendency to cry at all hours. Grace held her son in her arms and marveled at the journey that had brought her here. 3 years ago, she had stepped off a train in Vulture City, terrified and desperate, carrying secrets that threatened to destroy any chance at happiness. Now she had a husband she loved, a daughter who called her mama, and a son who depended on her for everything. It was not the life she had imagined for herself when she was young. It was better. Caleb was a devoted father to Matthew, rising in the night to walk the floor with him when he was fussy, changing diapers without complaint, and gazing at the boy with an expression of such pure love that it made Grace's heart ache. He was equally attentive to Sarah, making sure she did not feel displaced by the new baby, involving her in his care and praising her help. Their little family found a rhythm, the 4 of them moving through the days with the easy coordination of people who truly knew and trusted each other. One evening when Matthew was about 6 months old, Grace stood at the window watching Caleb teach Sarah to rope a fence post in the yard. The baby was asleep in his cradle, his small fists curled against his cheeks. The dinner dishes were washed and put away, the house was clean, and the next day's bread was rising under a cloth on the counter. It was an ordinary moment, nothing special or remarkable. But Grace felt happiness wash over her so intensely that it brought tears to her eyes. This was home. This was family. This was the life she had been searching for without even knowing it. Caleb came in a while later, dusty and tired but smiling. "Sarah is getting good with that rope. Another year and she will be able to help with the real cattle work. She is growing up so fast," Grace said. "Sometimes I look at her and I can hardly remember the wary little girl who showed me the chickens on my first day here. That is your influence. You have given her confidence and joy." Caleb came to stand beside Grace, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "You have given all of us that." "You have given me the same," Grace said, leaning back against his chest. "I never thought I could be this happy, Caleb, After everything with John, after all the fear and uncertainty, I thought maybe I did not deserve happiness. Everyone deserves happiness. You just had to find the right place and the right people to share it with. Caleb kissed the top of her head. I am glad you found your way here, Grace. Glad you got off that train in Vulture City. Glad you trusted me enough to let me help fix the mess. We fixed it together, Grace corrected. That was the promise, remember? We would fix it together. And we did. We fixed it and built something better on top of it. They stood together in the quiet house, holding each other while their children slept and the desert night settled over the ranch. Outside, a coyote howled in the distance, but it was a familiar sound now, part of the landscape Grace had learned to love. The years continued to pass, each one building on the foundation they had laid. The ranch prospered under Caleb's careful management and Grace's practical support. They added more cattle, improved the house, and built a new barn to replace the aging structure that had been there when Grace arrived. Sarah grew into a capable young woman, as comfortable on horseback as she was in the kitchen, equally skilled with a lasso and a sewing needle. She had her father's determination and her late mother's green eyes, but Grace saw her own influence there too in Sarah's quick wit and refusal to accept limitation based on her gender. When Sarah was 15, she asked if she could learn to keep the ranch books. Caleb taught her mathematics and accounting, and she proved to have a head for numbers that amazed them both. By the time she was 17, she was managing most of the financial aspects of the ranch, freeing Caleb to focus on the physical work he preferred. Matthew grew into a sturdy boy who followed his father everywhere, soaking up knowledge about ranching, and the land with the single-minded focus of a child who had found his calling. He was gentler than Sarah had been at the same age, more given to thoughtful observation than reckless action, but he had his own kind of strength. When Matthew was 3, Grace gave birth to another child, a daughter they named Emma after Caleb's mother. She was a cheerful baby who rarely cried and seemed to find joy in everything around her. Sarah doted on her little sister, and Matthew was fiercely protective, declaring that no boy would ever be allowed to court Emma when she grew up. You may want to rethink that position in about 15 years, Caleb told his son with amusement. Their home was full of life and laughter. The rough frontier ranch transformed into a place of warmth and love through the combined efforts of everyone in the family. Grace sometimes thought about John Kellerman, rotting away in a prison cell somewhere. She felt no sympathy for him, but neither did she waste energy on hatred. He was part of her past, a chapter that had closed permanently when she chose to trust Caleb and build a future based on honesty instead of deception. She occasionally received letters from friends in St. Louis, updates about people she had once known and a world that now felt impossibly distant. She would read them with interest but no longing. That life, those people, belonged to someone she used to be. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Caleb surprised Grace with a trip to Tucson. Mrs. Chen agreed to watch the children, and the two of them spent 3 days in the growing city, staying in a real hotel and eating in restaurants and attending a performance at the theater. This reminds me of our courtship, Grace said over dinner on their last night. Except we did not actually have a courtship. We skipped straight to the crisis and drama, Caleb laughed. True, but I like to think we made up for it in the years since. We have had a good life, have we not? Grace reached across the table to take his hand. Despite the rocky start. The best life I could have imagined. Caleb's thumb stroked across her knuckles, a familiar gesture that still made her heart flutter even after a decade together. You know what I think about sometimes? That telegram you got the day you arrived, the one that started this whole mess. What about it? I think about how easily you could have gotten back on the train, how you could have run away instead of staying and facing the problem. If you had done that, if you had chosen the easy path, we would never have met. Sarah would have grown up without a mother. Matthew and Emma would not exist. Caleb's voice was rough with emotion. So many things had to go exactly right for us to end up here. It feels like fate. Or just stubborn determination on both our parts, Grace said with a smile. You did say we would fix it together. And we did. Caleb raised his glass in a toast, to fixing things together for the rest of our lives. Grace clinked her glass against his. To the rest of our lives. They returned to the ranch refreshed and happy, greeted with enthusiasm by 3 children who had missed them terribly despite Mrs. Chen's best efforts to keep them occupied. The house felt more like home than ever, filled with noise and chaos and love. As the children grew older and more independent, Grace found time to pursue interests beyond the daily demands of ranch life. She started a small sewing business, taking in work from women in Vulture City and the surrounding ranches. Her skill with a needle had not diminished, and there was satisfaction in creating beautiful things while also contributing to the family income. Caleb supported her wholeheartedly, even building her a small workroom off the side of the house where she could spread out her projects without worrying about children or animals interfering. You do not have to work, he told her more than once. The ranch provides enough. I know I do not have to. I want to. The same way you want to work the ranch even when it is hard and frustrating. We all need something that is ours, something we are good at that makes us feel valuable. Caleb understood. He was a man who defined himself by his work, and he recognized the same need in his wife. Sarah announced at age 19 that she wanted to go to the new teachers' college that had opened in Tucson. She wanted to be a teacher, to help other children the way Mrs. Chen and Grace had helped her. It was hard to let her go, but Grace and Caleb supported her dream. They saw her off on the stage to Tucson with hugs and tears and promises to write every week. Our baby is grown, Grace said as the stage pulled away, dabbing at her eyes. She will always be our baby, Caleb said, his own voice suspiciously rough. She is just a baby with her own life now. Sarah thrived at college and returned 2 years later with a teaching certificate, and a young man named Daniel who wanted to ask Caleb's permission to court her. Caleb interrogated the poor fellow for an hour before grudgingly admitting he seemed suitable, and Grace had to hide her laughter at the whole performance. Sarah and Daniel were married a year later in the same church where Grace and Caleb had wed. It was a joyous occasion, the church packed with friends and neighbors who had watched Sarah grow up. Grace cried through the entire ceremony, happy tears for the beautiful woman her daughter had become. When Sarah and Daniel settled on a small ranch just outside of Vulture City, Grace felt the bittersweet ache of watching a child leave the nest tempered by the joy of having her still close by. Sarah visited often, and within 2 years had made Grace and Caleb grandparents to a sweet-faced girl named Catherine. Matthew, at 16, showed no signs of wanting to leave the ranch. He told Caleb flat out that his plan was to stay and eventually take over the operation, and Caleb could not have been more pleased if the boy had offered him gold. We will be partners, Caleb told his son. You and me, building this place into something that will last for generations. Matthew's face glowed with pride and purpose, and Grace knew her son had found his path. Emma, at 13, was still figuring out who she wanted to be. She had her mother's creative streak and her father's love of the land, but also a restless spirit that suggested she might surprise them all one day. Grace encouraged her to explore her interests, to read widely and think big, to never limit herself because of what other people thought a woman should be. You gave me that gift, she told Caleb one evening. The freedom to be more than what society expected, I want to give Emma the same. She is lucky to have you as a mother. They all are. Grace thought about the frightened woman who had stepped off the train in Vulture City 20 years ago, hiding secrets and terrified of the future. She barely recognized that person anymore. Life had transformed her, polished away the fear and deception, and replaced it with confidence and purpose. On their 20th anniversary, their children and grandchildren gathered at the ranch for a celebration. The house rang with laughter and conversation, 3 generations of family coming together to mark the occasion. After dinner, Caleb stood and raised his glass for a toast. 20 years ago, I took a chance on a mail-order bride from St. Louis. It was the best decision I ever made, even when it turned out to be more complicated than I expected. He smiled at Grace. My wife brought chaos and danger into my life, along with love and joy and partnership. She gave my daughter a mother and gave me children I treasure. She turned this house into a home and this ranch into a legacy. Grace, you are my heart and my best friend, and I thank God every day that you got off that train in Vulture City. Grace felt tears streaming down her face as everyone clinked glasses and cheered. She stood and crossed to where Caleb waited, throwing her arms around him and holding tight. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything, for taking a chance on me, for saying we would fix it together, for loving me even when I did not deserve it." "You always deserved it," Caleb said firmly. "You just needed someone to help you see that." They stood together, surrounded by the family they had built, the life they had created through determination and faith and love. Outside, the Arizona sun was setting over the land they had worked for 20 years, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and gold. Grace looked around at the faces she loved, at the home she had made, at the man who had stood beside her through everything, and felt her heart overflow with gratitude. This was what she had been searching for all those years ago when she answered an advertisement for a mail-order bride. Not wealth or ease or escape, but belonging, family, home, and she had found it in the most unexpected way in the harsh, beautiful land of the Arizona Territory with a cowboy who had looked at her secrets and struggles and said simply, "We will fix this together." They had fixed it. And in fixing it, they had built something extraordinary. The years continued their steady march, each one adding new layers to the life Grace and Caleb had built together. Matthew married at 23, choosing a practical young woman named Alice who took to ranch life like she had been born to it. They built a small house on the northern edge of the property, and Matthew began taking on more responsibility for the day-to-day operations of the ranch. Caleb, now in his 60s, was happy to step back gradually, spending more time with Grace and their grandchildren and letting the next generation take the lead. He still rode out every day, still kept his hand in the work, but there was a contentment in him now that came from knowing the ranch would continue long after he was gone. Emma surprised them all by announcing at 18 that she wanted to study medicine. She had been helping the doctor in Vulture City with his rounds and discovered a passion for healing. It was an unusual path for a woman, but Grace and Caleb supported her dream without hesitation. "If anyone can do it, you can," Grace told her daughter. "Do not let anyone tell you that you cannot." Emma went to study in California, and her letters home were filled with excitement and challenge and determination. Grace read them aloud to Caleb in the evenings, both of them marveling at their daughter's courage. As Grace moved into her 50s and then her 60s, she found herself thinking often about the journey that had brought her here. The fears that had once consumed her seemed small now, distant memories of a younger woman who had not yet learned her own strength. She thought about John Kellerman sometimes, though less and less as the years passed. She had heard years ago that he died in prison, a footnote to a story that no longer had power over her life. She felt neither joy nor sorrow at the news, just a quiet acknowledgement that a chapter had truly closed. Her real life, her true life, had begun the day she chose to trust Caleb Youngblood with her secrets and her heart. Everything before that was just prologue. Sarah's children grew, and then Sarah became a grandmother herself, making Grace and Caleb great-grandparents. The family tree expanded, branches reaching out in new directions while staying rooted in the ranch that had been home for so long. On their 30th anniversary, Caleb took Grace's hand and led her out to the porch where they had spent so many evenings over the years. The sun was setting, painting the familiar landscape in gold and crimson, and everything was quiet except for the creak of the windmill and the distant sound of cattle. "You ever regret it?" Caleb asked. "Coming here, marrying me, building this life?" Grace looked at him in surprise. They were both gray now, lined by years and weather and work, but his eyes were the same warm brown that had steadied her on that first frightening day, and his hand in hers was as familiar as her own heartbeat. "Not for a single moment," she said firmly. "This is exactly where I am supposed to be." Even with all the struggles, the droughts and the hard times and the years when we barely scraped by, especially because of those things. We built this together, Caleb. Every struggle made us stronger. Every challenge we overcame proved we could handle whatever came next. Grace squeezed his hand. "I would not trade a moment of it, not even the hard parts." Caleb smiled, the expression softening the lines of his face. "I feel the same. You have made my life richer than I ever imagined it could be." They sat together as the sun sank below the horizon and the stars began to emerge. Somewhere in the house behind them, they could hear the sounds of family gathering for dinner. Matthew and Alice, their children and grandchildren, Sarah and Daniel visiting for the occasion. Emma home from her practice in Phoenix, where she was one of only 3 female doctors in the city. All of them, had grown from that first terrifying leap of faith Grace had taken when she stepped off the train in Vulture City, with secrets in her bag and fear in her heart. "Thank you," Grace said softly, "for seeing past my lies to the person I wanted to be, for giving me the chance to become her." "You did that yourself," Caleb said. "I just gave you a safe place to grow." "We gave each other that," Grace corrected. "That is what a real partnership is it not? 2 people making each other better, stronger, more than they could be alone." "That is exactly what it is." Caleb stood and offered her his hand. "Come on, we have a family waiting to celebrate with us." Grace took his hand and let him pull her to her feet. Together, they walked into the warm light of the house, into the noise and chaos and love of the family they had built together. Years later, when Grace was in her 70s, she sat at the big kitchen table with Emma's daughter, teaching her to sew. The girl, named Grace after her grandmother, was quick with the needle and eager to learn. "Grandma," young Grace said, "Papa told me you came here as a mail-order bride. Is that true?" Grace smiled at the memory. "It is true. I came on the train from St. Louis, not knowing what I would find or whether I would be welcome." "Were you scared, terrified?" "I had made mistakes in my life before coming here, and I was afraid those mistakes would ruin my chance at happiness. But they did not. No, sweetheart, they did not. Because I found people who were willing to look past my mistakes and see who I really was, and I learned that everyone deserves a second chance if they are brave enough to take it." Young Grace considered this seriously. "I think you are very brave, Grandma." "Thank you, sweetheart. But your grandfather is the truly brave one. He took a chance on a stranger with secrets, and he stuck by me even when those secrets came to light and threatened everything. That takes real courage." Caleb, dozing in his chair by the window, opened one eye. "I can hear you, you know." And I have no regrets. Grace laughed, the sound lighter than air. Neither do I, my love. Neither do I. She looked around the kitchen that had been hers for nearly 40 years, at the home she had built with work and love and determination. Through the window, she could see Matthew and his sons working with the cattle, carrying on the legacy Caleb had started. In the next room, Sarah was playing with her great-grandchildren, her laughter mingling with theirs. This was what she had been searching for all those years ago, though she had not known how to name it then. Family, home, belonging, a place where her past did not define her and her future was built on trust and honesty and love. She had thought she was coming to Arizona to marry a stranger and escape her mistakes. Instead, she had found everything she had ever needed. A partner who stood beside her through every storm. Children who called her mother. A legacy that would extend far beyond her years. All because a cowboy named Caleb Youngblood had looked at her secrets and fears and said the words that changed everything. We will fix this together. And together, they had fixed it all. They had built a life, raised a family, created a home that would stand for generations. They had proven that second chances were real, that honesty mattered, and that love built on mutual respect and partnership could weather any storm. Grace took Caleb's hand and held it tight, feeling the strength that still lived in his weathered grip. They were old now, their best years behind them perhaps, but she would not trade a single day of their journey together. I love you, she said simply. I love you too, Caleb replied, his voice warm with the contentment of a man who had lived well and loved deeply. Always have, always will. Outside, the Arizona sun blazed down on the land they had worked for decades, on the ranch that bore their legacy, on the family they had built from nothing but hope and determination, and the courage to trust each other, even when trust seemed impossible. And inside, in the home that had once been just a rough frontier ranch, but was now the heart of generations of love, Grace and Caleb Youngblood sat hand in hand, surrounded by family, living proof that sometimes the hardest beginnings lead to the most beautiful endings. Their story had started with secrets and fear, with a mail-order bride who forgot to mention her first husband and a cowboy who said, "We'll fix this together." It had been tested by deception and danger, by doubt and struggle. But through it all, they had held onto each other and built something that lasted. Not a perfect life, because perfect lives did not exist, but a real life, an honest life, a life rich with love and laughter and the deep satisfaction that comes from work well done and promises kept. As the sun set over Vulture City, Arizona, painting the desert sky in shades of gold and crimson and purple, Grace Catherine Youngblood looked at the life she had built and knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged, with exactly the person she was meant to be with, living exactly the story she was meant to live. And it was enough, more than enough, it was everything,